Hello, my loves. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Dustina. This is Boujee Astrology, and we're going to take a look at the major astrological transits throughout the month of February of 2025. Now, before I do any type of energetic breakdown, I want to let everybody know that starting on February 1st, because my goal is to actually put this out before February 1st, is that you will be able to book your sessions at a discounted rate through the website. So if you want an hour-long session with me, it's going to be $35. You want a 90-minute session with me, it is going to be $50. I don't care when you want to book it, but the only time that the rate will be discounted will be the month of February. I don't know that I'm going to include this in the month of March, so I am going to be saying just for now, it is February. You'll go to the website, be able to go through all the consultations, and the ones that are on special, you will see the discounted price. Links are going to be in the description of every single episode, like always. So anytime that you're wanting to book some time with me, you can book it for March, you can book it for April. It does not have to be in the month of February, but the purchase to get the discounted rate does require being done in the month of February. Okay. Oh, let's get into the month. Now, there's a couple things from the January month ahead forecast that I would like to reference, most specifically the chapter regarding medical astrology, because some of the things that I talked about before, many of you have had to deal with firsthand. But what I've also seen is now the real life element of that. And right around the time that I started to feel some of the energy shift to allow for that to happen, so too did the real life thing kind of manifest. And that had to do with Venus's vibration in the sign of Pisces. So I want to recap part of what I said before. And then I'm going to I'll give you the example, and then I will expand on it as to other ways that that thing can manifest. So what I talked about before is that Venus going into her exaltation, which the sign of Pisces is her exaltation, is that another way to say exalted is going to be entitled, empowered, the desire to do things, but Venus and Pisces wants things to be easy. And for many of us, we've had different things in our lives that we've wanted them to go easier. And there hasn't been always an easy way to get some things done. When it comes to Venus and her exaltation and medical astrology, I said if we situated that word from exalted to entitled, but another way to say titled in more layman's ways is lazy. Lazy. In my opinion, lazy. But that some people would start to have certain things on their body that did not function appropriately. There could be blockages. There could be something that starts to slow down. The way that that slowdown happens can have a multitude of ways that it manifests in your body. But if you started to feel sluggish, if you were starting to feel slowed down, if you started to feel like something wasn't necessarily vibing appropriately, I said then, it's like, I'm not trying to diagnose anybody whenever it comes to that part. It's more along the lines of your body is responding in a certain way, take your ass to the doctor. Go get your labs done. Go do that other thing so you can figure out what's going on. Because whenever it comes to the springtime and the way all the planets are laying out, there's so much of it that speaks to negative impacts to the body. And I've seen it manifest for some people. And some of you, you've messaged me individually going, oh, this happened to my grandmother. Oh, this happened to my mom. This happened to my dad. This happened with my brother. This happened with me. With me. And so many of you would have blown it off had I not been so adamant about that warning before. But whenever it comes to the dynamics of what we're going into in February, the strain and stress on people's bodies arguably is going to get a little bit worse. So I'm going to start with the medical astrology. And then I'm going to venture into some of the other things that I've been picking up on. Venus is about to go into Aries. Now, again, whenever it comes to what Venus rules on the chart or in the body, the way that we take in food, the way that we take in pleasure, so anything tied to your sinuses, your mouth, your throat, your tongue, all through your thyroid area, down this throat area, all the way until it gets to your actual stomach, the organ now. And the actual stomach is more associated with the moon. Whenever it comes to other parts of your body, Venus has co-rulership of the lungs. Anything on your body that has duality, so you have two eyes, two legs, two arms, two lungs, two kidneys, Mercury will also have some co-rulership there. The lungs are associated with Venus. Kidneys, primary ruler is Venus. Some of your sexual organs, Venus. Your bladder, Venus. I was very adamant that if your body starts to feel sluggish in January, to go get the checks, to go get your labs pulled, to try to get ahead of something before your body starts forcing levels of reaction. Now, I was primarily using the example of kidneys before. And what I said in the first episode is like, at that moment, it's like, I don't pick up on the lung things quite yet, but I figured it was going to change. And it has changed energetically. Like as Venus has gotten closer to Neptune, the energy around the lungs has been different. And that's literally the transit that we use to start the month of February. The very first transit right out the gate is a Venus-Neptune conjunction. And then Venus is going to go into Aries, which is her detriment. And as we go through parts of these next few months, we've already been dealing with one planet in its detriment. That would be Jupiter. And that's been going on since last summer. We've had this in and out vibration of Mars being in its fall. And I've kind of talked about that once before too. The difference between a planet in its detriment and a planet in its fall is like comparing the Sahara Desert, a planet in its fall, to the actual fiery purgatory lava imagery that we have when we think of the concept of hell. Planet in its detriment is hell, just for this example. A planet in its fall is stuck in the Sahara Desert in the middle of August trying to survive. Mars is in its fall. Jupiter is in its detriment. But as we go through this month, Venus will be going into her detriment, and so too will Mercury. We have a lot of planets that mean focus on very primary areas of the body that are not going to be well placed in the transits. And the energy speaks to that having manifestations in the body. And I see it happen way too frequently. Now, a real life example of something as we've gotten closer to Venus and Neptune that has occurred that you can Google and find this on your own. In Kansas, I'm going to say it that way first because that's what all the headlines are going to read. There has been an outbreak of tuberculosis, which is a disease that impacts the lungs that can be spread through exposure. And you're going to hear me say the word exposed quite a bit through this episode, but in the different ways. Right now, we're talking about medical exposure. Okay. Once you're exposed to, it's kind of like if you're to include too close proximity to somebody with COVID and they're coughing. Same thing with tuberculosis. You can get it through airborne passage. This week, there has been a confirmed outbreak in the state of Kansas, and that's what all the headlines will read, of a tuberculosis outbreak. Now, I got nosy because you know I do. And I Googled it. And I want to be a little bit more clear about what that headline is not saying. Because I wanted to know what county, and I can't even remember the name of this county now, but I did Google it. It started with a W. What county was having this outbreak? And it is a county in the Kansas City, Kansas side that has had an outbreak of so far, or the last I checked, it was over 76 confirmed people with tuberculosis. And again, all the headlines are going to read Kansas. If you Google what county, it's Waxahachie. It's something with a W. I'm so sorry about that. I've forgotten what it was called. I looked it up a few days ago and I've tried to sleep since then. If you Google up that county and you look at where it's at, it is a Kansas City, Kansas part. Because Kansas City itself is in two different states. One part is in Kansas. The majority is actually in Missouri. And they're trying, I know what the news is trying to do. They're trying to control the response by saying it's only in Kansas, but really it's Kansas City, Kansas. So, and the Missouri side is not giving any type of numbers for anything. So those numbers could be higher, but that other state is not wanting to report it yet, or they haven't got the numbers to report. There's something there. I thought that part was interesting. And again, I think of what I was saying before whenever it came to Venus and the fact that she has co-rulership of the lungs and the fact that there can be parts of our body that get impacted where it's not going to function appropriately, that there can be something that impacts it. There can be blockages. But whenever it comes to Venus and Neptune, there can be exposures and spreading that we don't necessarily understand. One of the other examples I provided before was like more like along the lines of STD. Venus, Neptune can be more of like an STD type thing. But it has a multitude of ways that it can manifest. And it is the first in the series of 3, because there will be 3 Venus-Neptune conjunctions altogether, which tells me that whatever comes through, whatever we learn in the first one, in a lot of ways we got to react to try to understand, and it's going to lead to more things, not necessarily just be a one and done situation. So we're starting the month in a real interesting, precarious area. And as the month progresses, we're going to have a lot more energies that start to come through, that once they come through, we will have our individualized, internalized reaction to something. But they will not all be progressed and reactive towards another person. In a lot of ways, every time something hits throughout the month of February, now I'm moving away from the medical for a little bit. I'm actually going to go more into like the energetic pattern. It's like every time something happens, it's like a shock wave. And as the month progresses and more shocks hit the system, the first few, we're going to do stuff. That news is going to lead to one response or another. It's going to lead to one action or another. It's going to lead to a ripple effect. But over so much time, if you always throw rocks in the water, you have to just kind of let the waves go before you actually see how the waves smooth out. And I think that's what the last half of February is going to be feeling like. So much hit all at once that the last part of the month, it's just like trying to understand what to react to, letting a few things settle down before we react. And whenever you put into focus what's going to happen over a 30-day span, and a 30-day span that we're already in at the 1st of February, there is a reaction that needs to happen, but it's going to take time before we get to that full point. And let me explain why I'm saying that now. From January 30th to March 1st, putting that as the 30-day span, 4 planets change directions. 4 of them. On January 30th, Uranus turned direct. On February 4th, Jupiter will turn direct. On March, what did I say? February 23rd. I'm so sorry. I know March is a shit show, but I know everything in February is like taking us into the shit show. So I apologize. Whenever it comes to February 23rd, and for most people, it's going to be the 23rd. For some people, it's going to be the 24th. It really comes down to time zone on that one. But that one, for some of you, it's going to be the 23rd. Others, it's going to be the 24th. Mars's retrograde will end. But then 5 days later, March 1st, Venus will turn retrograde in Mars's sign. Now, I've said this stuff to you guys before. We look at the transit, but then we also look at the condition of a host. The host would be whatever planet rules the sign the transit is happening in. So everything that's happening in Pisces has 2 rulers, Neptune, who's still in Pisces right now. So I don't always talk about Neptune in the sense of being that ruler unless I have to, but I put more emphasis on Jupiter because he's the traditional ruler. And everything that's happening in Pisces is impacting Jupiter. Same thing as like last fall when everything was going on in Sagittarius, it was also impacting Jupiter. throughout the majority of this Mars retrograde, the only thing that we've had in Mars's signs has been the North Node, but that changed at the beginning of January. And now the rest of the Mars retrograde, the dynamic will change again because we're going to have Venus in Mars's sign, reacting to something. And the thing is like Venus isn't going to be full steam ahead. She's not going to move all the way through. She's going to react to something. And then she's going to turn retrograde, and that reaction is going to be even more different. And for many people, some of the things that started to roll out throughout January and February, some of the decisions that you've made as individuals, some of the things that we've seen in the big picture, big scope of things, the next round, the next layer, the next effect that impacts said vibration is going to start to roll out. But we're not going to understand that rollout and again, that reaction in a multitude of ways until we get through the month of February. For a lot of people, February will have a stunned, like a bong, like that stunned effect. And it's like the shock will have a frequency that it's just like, I can't stop moving my hands quite yet. We're reacting to something. Now, whatever decisions, whatever news, whatever changes that do come in February, again, are going to have something that is meant for a long-term effect. But for a lot of people, the long-term effect, to make it stick the way our goal is setting, it's going to require work. That work is going to have layers and levels. For other people, one decision made in temporary energy is going to lead to negative reactions over time as more and more people get hit and implemented by it. That doesn't sound like anything that we're concerned about from, our new regime of Congress and everything else over the United States, does it? No, maybe a little bit. I don't know. Oh, I've got some speculation on that. And I don't mean political speculation. I've seen a lot of things in my meditation, and I don't want to put it in the intro of this video. I want to put it more in the closing. But what I want to cover next has to do with something else that is very intricate in trying to understand parts of the pattern. And some of you have heard me talk about this before, but others, you've probably never heard this before, because most people, when they start looking at reading the energies and reading astrology for certain people, they don't necessarily look at the patterns quite the way that I do. There's probably some other ones out there, but I don't know that so many astrologers look at it the way that I do. Most of you know that I pay attention to the daily transits, the way the moon works and everything else, but I also pay attention to indirect transits. However, I don't put a lot of emphasis on indirect transits unless I feel like it's necessary. It's going to be necessary. Over the course of the next few months, it is going to be necessary. Now, these indirect transits that I'm referring to are known as anticias and contra-anticias. Now, an anticia is known as a secret opposition, an opposition that is not easily seen. You standing opposite of another individual, this is directly seen. But an anticia is having the person right next to you being your hater, being the person that is opposing, being the person that does not have your back, that does not see eye to eye with you. But because you're so focused on what's ahead of you, you don't realize that this energy has shifted and this energy has changed. Over the course of the rest of the spring, we are going to go into a series of both an anticia, one major one that is an anticia, and contra-anticias. Now, the contra-anticias are known as secret alliances. It's like this little thing coming together. And then once the planet goes into the next sign, the way that it carries forward, the way that it is expressed, the way that it works moving forward is based off of previous understandings of something. There's a different level of guidance. But then there's layers and levels to understanding what I'm saying right now. When it comes to the signs that indicate where we do our points of measurement. It's the point of the sky where the cardinal sign picks up from the previous mutable sign. So cardinal signs are Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. The first day of Aries season is the first day of spring. The first day of summer is the first day of Cancer season. The first day of fall is the first day of Libra season. The first official day of winter is the first day of Capricorn season. And that's why tropical astrology stays focused where it does versus Vedic, because it's actually in alignment with the seasons. A lot of people forget that part. Now, the thing about those lines, the solstice lines, the equinox lines, whichever one that we're talking about, there's a point in the sky, though, that if you're on one side of the line or the other, it's that it's receiving the same amount of light, big air quotations on how I'm describing this next part. And if you were to fold the chart at said equinox line or solstice line, two planets that do not look like they are opposing each other, or two planets that look like they are in alignment with each other, that do not look like they're in alignment with each other, will suddenly meet. So I have an example of what I'm talking about. Got a piece of paper. You can see the piece of paper. These two dots, these two are in an opposition. These X's, they're not in a direct opposition. They will not actually hit their opposition until you fold the chart and you lay it on top of each other. Why am I bringing this part up? Because I'm looking at the rulers of where the future contra-ANTICIAs are going to be and what they are doing. The majority of the transits over the next few months are going to be ranging between the signs of Pisces and Aries. The ruler, the traditional ruler of Pisces, is Jupiter. Jupiter is in his detriment, bringing back some of the previous info that I've already talked about. Aries will be the other sign that majority of these upcoming transits are going to be in, and the ruler of Aries is Mars, and he is in his fall. He is retrograde still. His retrograde will end this month, but a lot of what we're working through right now and why it's so hard to get things going has to do with the fact that some of the actions that we are taking feels like we're trying to do our best to get out of being stuck, being out of situations that are not feeling natural. And the majority of people that are struggling in this means that they don't have these natal placements. And I know what that feels like as an individual. I always know how Mercury in Pisces and Mercury in Sag feels because I feel it up here. I am a Mercury and Gemini person. My Mercury is in its actual home sign. It's a very well-placed Mercury. So when the energy shifts and things start to go more into those areas that are in aspects of detriment, I can feel the energy change. And one of the reasons I got into astrology is because the astrology lined up why the energy change could be felt. There is indirect parts of these next few months that as Mars is wrapping up its retrograde these next few weeks, that every time it starts to take some kind of action, it's like we keep seeing something that hits those little hair triggers that that action, the person that's taking the action, is not anticipating the awareness, the ideas, the concepts, the planning that's starting to stew up here. And once this fully takes effect, this will lead to the reactions and how those reactions are planted and serviced and taken forward later. Maybe not in the immediate, but later. And this is why I say February feels like each time something comes through, shock, shock, bong, bong. And until the bongs stop, we don't feel like we can get a grip on certain things. parts of February will continue to feel like we're losing grip on something. Now, if you put that in the concept of the obstacle course, it's going to feel like that energy that we tethered ourselves to, for those that are in the three-legged race, that felt so sure and confident before, it's like our legs are getting loose. And the looser the legs are, the less likely we're going to be able to keep our steps in order. Or if you're in that potato sack race, it's like the more we're starting to realize our steps, it's like the bag is ripping. It's like something is not staying intact. And if you are lucky enough, air quotations and sarcasm purely, when I'm saying you're lucky enough to be in the three-legged potato sack race, so you're dealing with both sides and being connected to energies that you did not previously find yourself connected to, and still trying to pick up on everything as you go, it's going to be even harder to get through the upcoming vibration because of the level of frustration and volatility and that need to react to certain things. And for a lot of people, once Venus enters Aries and she's in her detriment, there's something about Venus and Aries that for a lot of people, it can feel like woman power, Venus being the feminine, and feeling like we need to defend ourselves. But it's like we're hitting a brick wall because not everybody understands why we're reacting the way that we're reacting. And it's going to lead to another layer to the stagnant vibration as the month continues. And it's going to lead to something erupting. Maybe not directly in the month of February, but there are eruptions that are going to follow. Volatile eruptions that are coming. And I'm not putting an exact date on that. I feel like a lot of it's March. But a lot of February is setting the stage for what we're dealing with whenever it comes to March. And I've got more, but I want to put it in the closing and not so much anymore in the intro. I want to stay focused now, and let's go ahead and get into the dates. And then I'll explain a little bit more and tie some more things together in the closing. Okay, let's just get into the charts. Oh, February 1st, first day of February. Got it at 10:30 a.m. Central Standard Time for those that are listening to audio only. The reason I have this, I actually covered this in our week ahead forecast going into this vibration. I was talking about Venus and Neptune, and their conjunction is literally why I named the weekly episode Lost in the Sauce. Because for some people, this is an all-consuming vibration. Now, for some of us, we can be very clouded in our judgment, Neptune, especially with that conjunction to the North Node being a part of this, and the North Node being the head of the dragon. We can be very clouded by our judgment, clouded by a belief, clouded by an idea, clouded by an inspiration. It doesn't always have to be horrible. Clouded by the effects, the exposure of something. Now, again, Venus and Neptune's conjunction, the way we are starting the month, is the first in the series of 3. Each one will be different. The first one is Venus direct, Neptune direct with the North Node. The second one, it will be the last days of Neptune and Pisces, and Venus will be retrograde. The third and final one will be both Venus and Neptune in Aries. So I'm going to give you those dates. Of course, February 1st is the first one. The second one is going to be March 27th. That is going to be that is going to be right around, hear me as I say this, the second eclipse. It's going to be right before Neptune changes signs. We are going to be in a Mercury retrograde in that second one. It's going to be crazy. But there will be things from the February 1st one that ties into whatever is going on in March 27th. The third and final one will be after everything is said and done, and that's going to be May 2nd. So we're literally talking about stuff that goes all the way now into May. Part of the vibration of now, setting the stage for everything we're going to be dealing with through March, April, and into May. Okay. Okay. Let's keep this going because we got a lot of dates. If we're dealing with the medical astrology with this Venus Neptune stuff, again, be aware of things that are impacting your lungs, your thyroid, your throat. Even I got like scratchiness in my throat right now. I know I don't sound like I normally do. Everybody keeps saying, you sound like you're sick. I'm really not, but I've been talking a lot, so this feels like extra dry is what it feels like. You can have the things that are impacting the kidneys. You can have things that are starting to impact your sexual organs. One of the other things that I talked about this one is if you start to meet someone this weekend, use protection. Because there can always be something with Neptune that impacts the immune system that has like an infectious vibration to it, which is also why I brought up the whole tuberculosis thing being an outbreak in Kansas. Like, be aware of the exposure of this particular transit and the things that it's going to lead to, because it does lead to something given that it's the first one. And a lot of whatever is happening these first few days of February is setting the stage for the whole dynamic for the rest of the time of the next few months. So yeah, here we go. Anyways, we're going to move this over to February 3rd. And at 4 p.m., so I'm not really going to move this by hour because this is going to be just fine. We got two things going on February 3rd. We have Mercury's trine to Jupiter. So it's just before, that's why I say this is going to go exact closer to the 4 p.m. range. Mercury hitting the trine to Jupiter. This is the last transit to Jupiter before Jupiter turns direct. Jupiter will literally turn direct the very next day. But Mercury is in the higher position and it is Jupiter's host. So a lot of times you guys get really confused whenever I say things like host. If you have a bunch of transits going on in Pisces, the ruler of Pisces is the host. Mercury rules Gemini. Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter in its own sign, like Jupiter's in Mercury's sign. So Mercury's in the higher authority, pushing an idea, pushing a plan, pushing a decision, pushing some kind of communication that leads to something feeling like it can turn around because literally within 24 hours, Jupiter's going to turn direct. So there is a long-term effect, information, situation, conversation, communication, dialogue, signature, something that leads to Jupiter finally turning around. There's a job offer and you haven't had a job in months. And as soon as you get the offer, maybe there's a sign-on bonus, like that type of an immediate turnaround, as an example. Okay. The other thing that's going on is Chiron is going to have its second square to Mars. Now, what's interesting about this square is the fact that the moon is hosting Mars. Mars is hosting the moon. There's also a moon Chiron conjunction that kind of leads into this vibration. So there tells me something in this area that it's like confirming that we're going to do something corrective, that we found a solution to overcome some type of adversity, since Mars is still retrograde, to overcome some type of frustration or situation. But there is something that speaks to that idea of like fixing or helping something with Chiron here, or understanding a wound, or having a wound reopened. Now, why am I saying reopened? Mars rules Aries. Chiron is in Mars' sign. Mars is retrograde, reapplying a square to Chiron. This time Chiron is direct while Mars is retrograde. An old wound coming back around that gets reopened. So it might not be solution oriented. It could be communication and information around this day that brings back an old disruption, reopens an old wound that requires efforts to overcome, heal, and fix. So be aware of the communication that's coming through, the decisions, the sign-offs around February 3rd. Okay, now, I'm going to bump this by hour. We're going to get into February 4th. The reason I want to do this by hour is because like the next few transits that happens right after midnight. So the first one At 1:57 a.m., so I'm bumping this to 2:30 because you guys know I bump this like every hour by the half hour. This is when Venus is going to go into Aries. Venus is now in her detriment, being hosted by Mars that is retrograde in her fall. A lot of the reactions in the atmosphere are based off of someone else's misbehavior, not behaving appropriately. Mars being retrograde in this emotional area. Some of this can be like the pulled forward response from another situation. So think of it this way, like they keep acting up, something's wrong, I don't know what's wrong. They're depressed, there's something going on. So you call the lifeline person. My lifeline person for the longest time, it was my grandmother. Like if I was not okay, I would look at you and say, I need to go home. And I didn't necessarily mean the house that I lived in or the apartment or whatever I was doing. What I meant was, I need to go to my grandmother's house. Leave me alone. I need that lifeline person. Venus's entry into Aries, and this is her first one. The second one will happen on April 30th, but this is the first one. And April 30th feels like it is the response, the finale of everything that goes disarray. This arrival, Venus's entry into Aries, for some people is going to feel like the lifeline to try to get someone to pull their head out of their ass. It is to try to find the solution. It is to try to empower someone. It is to try and get something turned around, but it will not be a quick turnaround. And again, this does feel like a reaction. It feels like a response. And for some people, it will even be a response to whatever has occurred the first, second, and third. So I want to be clear about that. Those last few days of January going to the first few days of February, Venus's entry into Aries can feel like a response. Now, this is a fire sign that Venus is in. So if we are having issues with the body, now we need to be paying attention to stuff that's being inflamed and feverish. Because anytime we start to deal with something that could be feverish, that's going to go into those vibrations too. Okay. Now, the other thing that's going to happen on February 4th is at 3:41 a.m., so I'm going to bump this by 2 hours, Jupiter turns direct. Jupiter is still in that trine from Mercury. Again, there can be some kind of decision, information, communication that leads to a turnaround. Given that these two are changing within hours of each other, it's like the arrival. For some of us, that arrival is going to happen at midnight. For other people, it's the human effect is it's going to be somewhere in the daytime. Let's be clear about that. But it's like that confirmation, that arrival, that approval, that news, that communication sparks a turnaround with Jupiter turning direct in Gemini. And it really kind of comes down to what Jupiter rules in your chart, what Gemini is associated with. And Aries and Gemini vibration can work very well with each other, even though these two transits are not necessarily correlated to each other in the moment. Their timing feels correlated because Venus just left Jupiter's sign. So in some ways, it can be about somebody leaving something behind, leave something to the turnaround. For other people, it's going to be the arrival of something new leading to the turnaround. So it really kind of comes down to who and what you're dealing with. Okay. Now, when it comes to February 6th, this is where we start to, the 6th and the 7th, this is where we're going to start to get into some of those hidden vibrations that are not easily seen. First off, we're going to have Venus and Neptune going through their first in the series of 3, they're contra-ANTICIAs. Now, contra-ANTICIAs, again, are alliances. It's something being spoken about that comes together. Now, Venus just had an actual conjunction to Neptune and the North Node before going into Aries. So for a lot of people, whatever happened around February 1st is leading to some kind of effect. And by the time that Venus gets to this area in the sky, we're more likely to voice, for a lot of people, it will be voice, what brought us here, why we're wanting to take an action, why we're wanting to work on something, why we want to take something in a certain direction. there's a voicing in this. Now, simultaneous to Venus hitting her first CONTRA-ANTISCIA to Neptune, we also have Neptune's conjunction to the North Node, and we're going to have the Mars Jupiter Antiscia. And the reason I'm counting the Antiscia is, again, Venus is in Mars' sign. Everything else is in Jupiter's sign. And a big part of the theme over the next few months is going to be the teetering between the two areas. But the rulers are like working against each other, or not. One side is not taking the other side's energy very, very well. And in some ways, that can be like all of the misaction of Mars is pissing people off more and more. Jupiter being in the sign of Gemini, and the fact that the Gemini has to do with duality and the twins, it's like, look, I understand why you think this way, but I'm telling you it's not going to work. And as more and more things emotionally erupt, with Mars trying to station in its retrograde in Cancer, it's the more people are going to be, their frustration is rising, their temperament is rising, the twinges in their neck, but they're not immediately reacting to something. There's going to be a lot of stewing. And there's something in the energy between the 6th and the 7th from the indirect transits that really let us know about the stewing. But there is also one direct transit in those times. And that is the most exact on the 7th. So I'm going to bump this one more day. Whenever Venus goes through its first of 3 sextiles with Pluto. Now, Pluto is direct. Venus is still direct, of course. The Moon and Jupiter are going to hit a conjunction this day, so I thought that was a real interesting energy. And we're also getting very, very close to the Mercury Cazimi. And again, there's usually some kind of information, that stuff that gets brought to light in the Cazimi, like there's announcements in that vibration. And this feels like telling someone, we feel like something's about to come, something's about to hit, something's about to be issued, something's about to come to light. We're waiting on the decision. And there's a power dynamic there. Now, for some people, this power dynamic can have a fear element because of Pluto. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that by any means. But Venus is not necessarily scared of Pluto in Aries. Venus is more likely to defend herself. It's more likely to put someone in their place. Call me sweetheart again. Touch me again. I'm going to smack the shit out of you. That is Venus in Aries. I will knock you into next week. Do not touch me. That is Venus in Aries. So even if there is a fear of something or a frustration of some sort, whenever it comes to Pluto's vibration, Venus will not necessarily put up with it. But if there is a fear that is being expressed, she will listen, absorb, and take it in. And it's like putting a pin in something until I need to know it later. And again, so much of this vibration is just like pin, pin, and pin. This is one of the first few pins of something, pinning something to the wall, putting a reminder, we're putting a digital energetic pin in that. I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to round back. Okay. Okay. Now, when it comes to more direct transits, there's a stewing indirectness about February 6th and 7th, but we actually do have direct transits that are going to hit more closer to the 9th. And this is going to be really interesting because we have Mercury Cazimi. Here's Mercury, here's the sun. They're very close to being at their exact, conjunction, but I'm not going to move this by hour. I don't feel the need to. What I think is really interesting is like their Cazimi is going to happen at the same time. Actually, I will move it by hour this time. Moving this to 6:30. Yeah. So here's the Mercury Cazimi, 21 degrees, 0 minutes. But at the same time, Saturn, the ruler of Aquarius for this part of the conversation, he's the traditional ruler, is hitting a trine to Mars, and it is the second of 3. The previous trines One happened on September 29th. The third and final one will happen April 4th. So there's something here about an action coming back around, something that has been reinstigated, Mars retrograde in Cancer, that's coming back to an authority figure, coming back to a responsible party. Another action or a misaction based off either a prior situation or someone that's been around for a while has made a misstep, and it requires some kind of clarity, Mercury Cazimi. It requires some type of response, Mercury Cazimi. It requires a decision to make a long-term change. Then why am I saying it long-term change? Because Saturn is in Pisces, which is a mutable sign, which is the sign that transitions us from one placement to the other. Transitions of authority, transitions of responsibility, transitions of power. That's been the whole theme throughout Mars and Pisces. Many are very fueled by their belief system. That's also, no, I said Mars and Pisces, Saturn and Pisces. Many of the people in places of authority are very fueled by their belief systems. That again is Saturn and Pisces. But what I'm looking at is Saturn is hosting that Mercury Cazimi, that knowledge coming to the forefront, that information that's coming to light, that is being expressed, that is being known. And again, it lets more and more people know of some level of misstep, or there's going to be emotional responses that don't necessarily match the vibration at hand, or their emotional responses will not be received well, regardless of whether they're right or not. Like there's just some little parts of it that feels like a misstep. Oh, okay. So again, Mercury Cazimi and Mars Saturn trine. Again, this is the second one. I think I said this part already. The first one was September 29th. The next one will be on April the 4th. So this is a long-term energy coming back full circle, coming back around. The Mercury Cazimi brings something to light. It brings something into focus. And then the next few days, we keep hitting the squares to Uranus, the other ruler of Aquarius. So the next day, on February 10th, closer to the afternoon around 1:15, Mercury is going to go into an exact square with Uranus. Mercury's in the higher authority, providing information that is either considered exciting, Mercury square Uranus. It is an announcement that can be considered unexpected, Mercury square Uranus. It can be that callback from someone that we are not anticipating. So there can be like the unexpected coming through based off of what has just been revealed with the Mercury Cazimi. The next day, on the 11th, still in the afternoon, going to be exact closer to around 1:30, that is when the sun will hit its exact square to Uranus. These few days between the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, 12th, these all feel very connected. When we get into the 12th, the reason I'm connecting them all the way through is because this will be our full moon in Leo, squaring that Uranus that just got hit. And it even takes me back to parts of last August when we had the full moon in Aquarius, because it was very similar, except for Mercury was retrograde back then, and now Mercury's direct. So that would be the difference, is Mercury's direct for it. But we had a Mercury Cazimi squaring Uranus, which built into a full moon in Aquarius squaring Uranus, which back then it was like Mercury's retrograde was changing, bringing certain things to light, bringing some level of exposure to something that was leading to an unexpected change that was going to halt a certain amount of things. This does not have the same halting vibration because Uranus is newly direct. So it's like each of these waves of information and confirmation and news that it's coming through is going to have a back-to-back effect of hitting other people, being received unexpectedly. For some people, it's exciting news, and it leads to a shift in ego because of the full moon in Leo versus a full moon in Aquarius. And it lets us know and kind of cements how some progressiveness will continue. But I mean progressiveness in the vibration. There's still volatility, given everything else involved. There's still a pattern of volatility. But this isn't Venus's volatility. She's not really playing into this. Yes, Mars has some parts in this because of that trine to Saturn and Pisces. But there can be very big changes that start to come through that feel settling versus unsettling. Exciting. It's a part of the work. It's very interesting. I'll get more as we get closer to this time frame. But I think there's some things that need to happen throughout the first 2 weeks of February for me to see this a little bit more clearly. But there is something about this full moon that takes me back to last August's Aquarius full moon. In a lot of ways, this takes me back. Okay, moving along. Moving along. All of those days, like I said before, those felt very, very connected. February 14th, happy Valentine's Day. Mercury is going into Pisces. Mercury is going into his detriment. So adding another planet to the list of detriments and falls. Oh, and I got to be honest. The last few years, every time Mercury goes into Pisces, it is like clockwork. I receive some kind of message from someone, whether it is a client or a family member or a friend or a mix of all of them. Last year was a mix of all of them. I will get something about somebody in the hospital every time Mercury goes into Pisces. And 9 times out of 10, it has to do with some type of weird abdominal health situation that has resulted in someone being in the hospital. I hate it. And given everything else that's going on, I'm not going to be surprised when I hear it this time. Now, what's going to be interesting is I want to take us back to something that I talked about the last time Mercury was in a Jupiter ruled sign, and that is last fall or last winter, going into fall to winter, November, December, when Mercury went into Sag. And I said before, it's like Mercury and Sag being in the mutual reception with Jupiter gives hope. It gives a lift. It gives more awareness than what we would normally have. And we had a Mercury retrograde in Jupiter sign that time. I'm saying we will have a Mercury retrograde that will be between Aries and Pisces. But I will say Mercury's entry into Pisces while Jupiter is still in Gemini keeps that, it reactivates that level of mutual reception. And there can be more forethought, more awareness, more information, more abilities to understand and process something faster than before. And it's like because we have somebody who's so experienced with seeing something, that responses can be faster in a multitude of ways. That can be in the health ways, but that can be in the real life ways. So I do appreciate the mutual reception, and that does kind of help Jupiter, and that's going to help Mercury. But it's still 2 planets in their detriment, while 2 other planets are, detriment and fall. So it's getting hinky. The vibration is getting hinky. And the more and more something goes one direction, it's like we're learning through experience. More and more people will be able to tune into the intuition during this time and lean into their intuition. And they're going to struggle with believing it, but that intuition is going to be very, very helpful. Okay. Mercury's in Pisces, another planet in its detriment. Yay, detriments. Okay, keeping this going. Now, this is the first entry. Again, he will go into Aries. He's going to turn retrograde roughly around March 15th, and he will re-enter at March 29th. But in this moment, this is the brand new just arrived entry. And at least this time, Jupiter is direct while Mercury being in its detriment. So we have more forward progression that can feel hopeful. But again, it's still in a lot of temporary energy. So I want to be clear about that. Okay. We're going to have a few days. It's not too intense. It's not too much of anything. We're going to get to February 18th. This is when the sun is going to go into Pisces. So we have the sun, Mercury, Saturn, Neptune, North Node, all being hosted by a newly direct Jupiter that has all the knowledge in the world, Jupiter and Gemini, to get something corrected, to take something forward. And a lot of us are going to be very, again, consumed by a belief, consumed by hope, consumed by many parts of the vibration based off of that Pisces energy. And the reason I keep saying the words consumed with that one, it has to do with like the bodies of water. And I always compare Pisces to the ocean. And we don't always know where the bottom is going to be. Scorpio is fixed water. It's like rivers and lakes. You know there's a bottom, you know there's an edge, and a lot of times you can see the edge. Cancer is like the storms that bring the water because it's an instigative sign, and emotional reactions have to do with Cancer. Pisces is the ocean. We don't always know the bottom. We don't always know the depth. We don't always know how deep we're going to go. We have to go to pull something back to the surface. But whatever gets pulled to the surface, Pisces vibration, leads to new beginnings once certain things move into Aries. The deeper we go into something, the more we can bring it to the forefront, the more we can bring it forward. Again, the more we get hit by certain things and the more certain things come to the surface, the more it makes us want to react to something. But I will again say, not all of us will be reacting in the moments, especially once Pisces season starts. I'll be clear about that. Okay. The day that the sun enters Pisces is also when Saturn is leaving shadow. So I got Saturn at 19 degrees, 25 minutes. This is literally the degree that he turned retrograde at back at the end of June in 2024. So in a lot of ways, once Saturn leaves shadow, it's time, air quotations on time, to focus on something that we weren't focused on before. So even though we still have mixes of some of the things from the old stuff, we are going to be able to take something into a whole new vibration based off of just Saturn's energy alone. And that will be helpful. And what we can also find ourselves doing is picking back up on things that come from last summer that we haven't been able to deal with. And it's like now they're going to be able to start to come back, and we are going to finally respond, and we are going to finally react, and we are going to finally take care of some old business too, depending on where we're at in different parts of that vibration. Okay. Now, on February 20th, Mercury is going to enter a square to Jupiter. I like this square, just kind of given that vibration that's in it. And literally when that square goes exact, getting closer to the exactness right here. Okay. This is where I've got it. For those that are listening to audio only, I got the screen at February 20th at 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Mercury's in the higher authority pushing a square to Jupiter, but Mercury's in Jupiter's sign. Jupiter's in Mercury's sign, but the moon is also going to be in Jupiter's sign. And we're going to be going through a final quarter moon during this. So the moon is actually squaring the sun whenever we talk about this little part right here. So it's like there is a wind down in the last quarter moon, but also an understood awareness and lesson and information that is exchanged between the doctor, the guru, the teacher. Some of us are going to be in a place where we can teach something to our own teacher that they don't necessarily know. Or it's like once they give that lesson again, we can, one, comprehend it differently, but two, we can add our own layers and levels to it. So this feels very good whenever it comes to like the knowledge sense and knowledge base. But again, once we get to these last few days of February, the vibration is going to start to wind down. Energy is starting to wind down. And even though we have like good information in one moment, there's still a lot of things that are slowing down and stagnating around us. So I want to be clear about that part too. All right. On February 23rd, we're going to bump this a few more days. Mercury is going to enter its trine with Mars. Oh my gosh. This is interesting to me. The Mercury-Mars trine is going to happen closer to 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. By that evening, Mars is going to go direct. And I'm going to remind everybody where we were at back at the beginning of December. Mercury was retrograde, winding back to an area of the sky where it's trying to re-enter a trine with Mars, but then Mars went retrograde and Mars started moving backwards while Mercury stationed to go direct, and they just started going in a different direction. And I think it's crazy that we were getting close to a trine. We were getting close to a point. We were getting close to a negotiation that literally kind of fell apart for a lot of people in December. It's just like, I'm not even going to try. I'm going to go in a whole different direction. Think back to what didn't click back in the beginning of December. Because in some way we can pick back up on it right here, but in a whole different way with a whole different set of knowledge, and most likely with a different person. And it's like, once we have that communication, Mercury hitting the trine to Mars, it's the shock wave. It's the bong effect to Mars. It's like somebody just slapped stupid back into common sense. Like, where have I been? What happened? What have I been doing? Oh, you've been on a bender for 3 weeks. It's time to sober up. It's actually been longer than 3 weeks if we include the entire Mars retrograde. You can be like, for like 3 months, it's time to wake up. Mercury Mercury will enter a trine to Mars. Something that we tried to do before, but something didn't click quite right, and it led to like levels of separation that once we get into this part of February, it's like we slide someone into place that can make a connection, and finally we can start to reverse the disruption because Mars will turn direct the same day. It's not the same hour. There's a couple hours in between the two, but it's like as soon as something gets heard, it's like, oh, I'm a little dizzy. What just happened? Where am I at? Where have I woke up? What is going on? Oh, this is how we're doing it now? What the hell changed over these last few months? A lot has changed. And I think it's kind of hilarious. And I have hope for this. But what I also think is interesting is while this is going on, we also have a CONTRA-ANTISCIA that will happen between Saturn and Venus. And there can be some kind of knowledge, some kind of information, some kind of authority that's like flexed in this moment. That once that knowledge is there, once that information is provided, it also has like a stunned ripple effect that we don't initially know how to respond to. And this is the timeline that I feel like, yes, we will have need for response. We will desire response. But in a lot of ways, we are going to feel frozen and be like, I don't even know how to respond. I need a minute. I need some coffee. I need to sober up. I need a minute before I can do something. And that's what a lot of this feels like. It's not fast moving. As we get through the last part of February, there will be a lot of stagnancy in the air because of how many planets are slowing down. But there will still be big things and big news and big information and big connections that are happening in here that allow for certain things to flip. Okay. On February 25th, so I'm going to bump this 2 days, Mercury is going to make its first conjunction to Saturn. And this is the only one. Now, Saturn's not in shadow yet. Mercury's not in shadow yet. But it's not like with the Venus one where I said, even though Venus and Saturn are not in shadow yet, there is still like the first in the series of 3. There's only one of these. So Mercury's conjunction to Saturn, there's an idea, there is communication, there is announcements, there's something about a change that is about to roll out, that is about to happen. The length and the level as to how this comes through for everybody is going to be different, but it is going to spark some level of change a change in opinion, again, a change in certain communications and certain ideas. Not all of them will easily be seen, but again, this is the first conjunction. It goes most exact right around 6 a.m., so real early in the morning. And again, there is knowledge to this. There is more awareness to this because Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception. So every time something happens to Mercury, Jupiter is impacted. But this is two planets having a conjunction in Jupiter's sign. And it can make us aware even more of something that we're going to have to change and turn around. But I don't think that we're changing it all and turning it around right here. But there can be the announcements that leads to changes. So expect announcements around this day whenever it comes to your personal life. Announcements, decisions, stuff like that. Okay. Whenever it comes to February 27th, that'll be our last major transit date. Mercury is going to go through a conjunction. I'm sorry, not a conjunction, a sextile to Uranus, right as we go through the exact new moon in Pisces. Now, the new moon in Pisces should be an eclipse, but it's not an eclipse. It's too far away. For a lunation to be an eclipse, it has to be within 15 degrees of the node. North node, south node, doesn't matter. Has to be within 15 degrees. When this new moon occurs, it's only going to be 17 degrees away. So north node is at 27 degrees. The new moon's at 9 degrees. I'm just rounding it out. They're 17 degrees away from each other. 17 and a half. They're not close enough for this new moon to be an eclipse. However, the intensity around this and the fact that all of this is being hosted by that Jupiter that's turning direct, and then immediately following this, Venus is going to turn retrograde. The vibration, the shift, the transition of our focus, of what we're dealing with, of everything here will feel so intense. It will be eclipse-like in these days, but it is not going to be an eclipse. And I want to be absolutely clear about that. Okay. Oh. In my meditation, I said there was a couple of things I picked up on that I have not wanted to say before. I've said it to some people more of an individual standpoint, but I've not actually said it on the podcast. But I have been a guest on another person's podcast recently. And part of what I'm about to cover here, I did talk about in hers, but I didn't get to do it as clear as I initially desired. So I want to put a more clear focus here of something that I'm seeing a return pattern of. I want to tell you guys a little bit of a story backwards to bring it forwards to make sure this kind of makes sense and where I'm putting my initial focus in this current vibration. Back in 2020, whenever I was still in home building, I kept telling my boss, I can feel something. I can feel something coming. There's something that we're not seeing clearly. There's something that we're about to get blindsided by. There's just something here. Dusty, you're being negative. Not being negative. He was very consumed by like everything going his way. Like he was having a great year, the owner was, and he really felt like his shit did not stink all of a sudden. But really the transit was the North Node in Gemini was making a conjunction to his Jupiter and my stellium in Gemini. So I could see the vibration differently than him. And his Jupiter stuff was way different than mine. I didn't say all that in the other person's podcast, but still. I kept saying, like, I can see this. I can see it. There's something coming. I don't know when it's going to hit, but it's going to hit really soon. There was two things that happened at the beginning of this inflation bubble that we're in that I feel like are about to hit either the next wave or it's going to be the deflate. Like we're getting really close to something. And I've been feeling it for a while. I just haven't said it on the podcast. In 2020, the way that the current inflation bubble started was two areas. One, throughout COVID, the ports were not being worked. They were not being manned appropriately. There was so many issues because people were getting sick. There wasn't enough people to go work the ports. And there was a bottlenecking for months. And I mean, most of 2020, people didn't always know when they were going to get their material in because the ports were so backed up. And that had a trickle effect where it impacted the appliances. Now, if you work in retail, you would actually remember this. If you were in home building or real estate in any way like me, you might remember this too. Like, we build certain things here in America, and I'm going to use Whirlpool as my example because there's a Whirlpool plant here where I live in Oklahoma, that they build the appliance here. But the computers and the motherboards were on a boat in a cargo bay that nobody knew where it was, and nobody knew whenever it was going to get finally checked in by customs to get shipped to be handled. And there were so many different appliance like things that there was a scarcity in the summer of 2020. And I remember that very clearly. But then there was also the lumber spike that happened in September of 2020. And that was right as Mars was turning retrograde in Aries. Please note what I just said. Aries. Put a pin in that. Okay. I said it then. This is the start of a bubble. Dusty, you're being negative. You cannot see the start of a bubble. The lumber pricing came in and it was like 300 times the previous month's pricing. Lumber pricing gets sent out every month. And it was a huge spike. I'm like, no. This is the start of a bubble. It's going to have a ripple effect. It's going to affect our trades. It's going to affect all of the things that are wood related, carpentry, cabinets, trim, siding, fencing, blah, 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 blah. Dusty, you're being negative. No, I'm not. I'm being realistic. We should get ahead of these things. 6 months later, my head of purchasing is looking at my boss going, do you remember when Dusty told you that this was going to happen? This is going to happen. And it started to get really icky. And that's when I said the things that I said to get me out of that industry. And now you have me here doing this with you guys. That was then. Now in 2021 to 2022, that time frame when Jupiter was doing its bout through Aries, real estate and home building took off. And I'm going to keep equating this to home building because that's where the majority of my experience is. But I want to say construction as a whole. It boomed. It took off. And during that time, people were spending money like it was water. Just boom. I don't know how many times I heard people saying, I'm buying this investment property and this investment property. And they act like they had a tree in their backyard that just printed money. And that really didn't stop until we got into 2023 and Jupiter moved into Taurus. And then the vibration shifted. And I knew it would, because there was a very big consuming energy that took over whenever North Node Jupiter happened. And now we're getting closer. Now we're in this North Node Neptune. This has been very different too, but I'm going to go off on a stagnant tail, so I don't want to do that. But I think back to what all was happening while Jupiter was in Aries. And it was like this boom of that growth that didn't stop until Jupiter left. Now we have all of this vibration going back into Aries. And in my meditation for months, I keep seeing like there's going to be something that hits that home building industry. And I can see it in a couple of different ways. Now, this I have already said on another person's podcast, and I will link her stuff, by the way, in the description. Her podcast is not on YouTube. You will actually have to listen to it on Apple or Spotify or somewhere else. I will put the links in the description, but I am still covering it here too. So if you want to go listen to that one, you can. I know a lot of you guys like to listen no matter what. Some of you can just listen to this and it's still going to be there. When I met with her for our preliminary appointment in November, I told her, like, there's going to be something that hits the real estate industry because everybody keeps talking about how high real estate pricing is, but everybody forgets that people were buying land at outrageous prices too. And I had to be there where I was at in home building, we had to know from ground up. So infrastructure to land up. And I also know that you can't just go get a loan on a piece of land that you're not even going to be able to build the infrastructure and subdivide out and make a profit off of for 2 years. and I'm thinking this from big land development standpoint. If you do like a small little piece, that's a very different conversation. I'm talking about like the communities that I used to be a part of. So you had to use a lot of cash. For builders, they were going out and spending their cash reserves on land purchases. And they too were buying land at a high with the idea that we're not in a bubble. No, this is just the way things are going to go now. That frantic energy is going to be all over the place. And then it didn't happen that way. And the inflation of the interest rates and everything started hitting that direction. And it was an autocorrect to the system. And every realtor that I talked to in 2024, like, when is it going to turn back around? Not this year. And I was serious, not in 2024. For most people, you had like one or two decent deals, but really it wasn't like it was a couple years before that. And it wasn't like it was whenever I was doing home building between 2015 and like 2020. It was a very different beast. And I was like, it's not getting any better anytime soon. But the last part of 2024, I started to see it. I'm like, there's something coming with home building. And I can see it going in a couple different directions. Now, as a whole, I've already seen this manifest in a couple different ways in real life. But I also know that there's the other ways that hasn't manifested yet. And I'm expecting both. One, some of the builders that overextended themselves, that they bought too much, they started to look for people that they could merge their companies with. And what you're going to see over the course, I'm using home building as this part of the example, but this will also lead into some of the rest of the closing too. They had to go find other builders that had more of a cash reserve to balance their books out. And there's going to be mergers that get announced as a part of these next few months. And I have already seen a couple of those. I know Lennar and DR Horton are two nationwide home builders that they have done major purchases and acquisitions of smaller builders that are now being brought into their books. But what about the builders that overextended themselves on the land purchases that they can't find a buyer? As we go through parts of the last part of February, the people that can't find an investor, that can't find another source of money, that can't get certain things lined out, whether this is in home building or any other form of construction, any other form of business, they will also fall into the stagnant energy in the last part of February. And what example I gave in my friend's podcast was like, look, you're going to suddenly get into March or February, March, and people that were anticipating like all of this action on their home building process, it ain't going to be there. The trades aren't going to show up because we're not getting paid. Like something's going to happen. Now, the ripple effect is this is going to happen across the board in multiple industries. And I do feel like there will be failures of certain companies going into this spring. People that could not get their money in order fast enough, or because all of the government policy changes are not necessarily going in their favor. So those companies that were kind of holding out for a while, thinking that they were going to make the best of some things, once they got like final confirmation or they got their final numbers, they got something in final, it let them know the reactions that they're going to have. There's things that are going to come to a bit of a peak in February. And for some people, that'll be that transition of, two companies merging and the face change and that type of like uplifting and, rebranding of a company, that we're going to see that. But then we're also going to see other companies that are going to go into a fire sale. They have to get rid of all the product to be able to even break even. Some, and it really comes down to the ownership and management and how they're doing it, ego is going to get in the way. And once we hit that peak, and that's kind of that full moon in Leo, like that peak of like ego has to stop, at least in certain areas, that the response that will follow will have a rippling effect. And there's something about the last few days of Mars being retrograde, the turning direct, but then 5 days later, Venus turns retrograde in Mars's sign. There's something about that timeline that feels like once we reach like this final break in the turn, that there's no other choice but to respond based off of Venus turning retrograde on March 1st. Her turning retrograde is a reaction, it is a response to something that happens in February. Now, for some people, it will be one big major thing. For other people, it will be a multitude of small things that led to a big situation and a big turning reaction. It's kind of like a mom that has let all 5 kids push all of her buttons all day long. And she's trying to be cool. She's trying to be patient. The kids have not tuned in to the fact that mom's starting to lose her temper. And then at the end of the day, and she goes, ah! And you see the fear in their eyes. What, God, what's wrong? They don't realize that they're the anthill effect playing into mom losing her sanity. For some people, whenever Venus turns retrograde on March 1st, it's going to be mom has finally lost her sanity. There is something about February that forces another side to do some level of reaction. Some things are just not going to make sense until they have no other choice but to make sense. Some things you'll never get a clear answer, but it's like 2 + 2 is 4. You can figure it out. It's just you're never going to get satisfied with that person saying that they screwed their business up. You're just going to notice that none of the workers showed up to the job sites anymore. That something has not been working appropriately. And where it leads and goes from there is going to have a multitude of effects. Now, historically speaking, and this next little part it's in my research right now. It's something I will actually explain a little bit more in depth later on. Historically speaking, whenever certain transits have gone into Aries, they fuel reactions. It's the fire energy of Aries, the fueled reactions. So again, comparing it to like the mom losing her shit at the end of the day after the kids have been crazy all day. There's a fuel building throughout the entire month. And that speaks to the fact that Venus will be in Aries for the entire month. And her intentions at first will be with the idea of, I want to get something moved ahead and charged ahead. But by the end of February, we will realize I can't take it forward anymore. It's not going to continue. It's not going to go the way that we thought. And we're going to have no choice but to go backwards and go handle something and take care of certain things, treat certain things, depending on the level of exposure that we are talking about, the kinds of exposure, treat certain things before we can come back to this point and move forward. And we won't be able to fully move forward into whatever the new is going to be until we get into late April, May, June, July. That new normal will be the result, the response, the reaction, the landing after the other end of whatever the hell is about to happen over the next roughly 90 days. Going to what I said in that Lost in the Sauce episode of like, it takes about 90 days to build a pipeline. Not all of us are building pipelines. A lot of us are about to have to respond and react to things that we were not planning on, we were not anticipating, but we will have to deal with them. And I do feel like for a lot of people, there will be things that are impacting the health going into these next few months. And I cannot sugarcoat that enough. And there will still be someone that has the nerve to be surprised. I don't tell you. For other people, it will be things that test your beliefs and test your faith and test your hope, test your desires, your fortitude. There are tests. We've been in a test energy. We've been in a volatile energy. But the next part of where we're going in the roller coaster between February, March, and the first part of April, it's like a spinning in a tunnel. We are at the start of that whenever Venus goes into Aries. How tight that tunnel feels in its spinning, we will know once we get into the first part of March. But there's a continuous wave that we're in. By the time we get to the end of February and into March, we are going to be far more aware of a whole different obstacle. And that shit's going to feel like American Ninja Warrior. And every day and every week is going to feel like a very different obstacle. The amount of change and shift and awareness and response, it's going to be a lot. Okay. Oh, if you are working in a company that it feels like things are shaky, then they probably are. If you are trying to find jobs and nobody's hiring because it feels like things have been weird and shaky, that's because it has been that way. And a lot of businesses purposely waited to make a hire and make a change until after the presidential election because they wanted to see where things were going to land. And once Trump got confirmed, at least here in the States, but I know even some of my Canadian people, y'all still pay attention to what's going on here in the States because our stuff starts to impact your stuff. And some of these tariffs kind of fall into that category anyways. The reason I was bringing up all the old stuff from before is because the first thing Trump did was come into office and sign up billions of executive orders. Obviously, I'm being very exaggerated by saying that, but I'm not that far off. And one of those things was the immediate taxation and tariffs of goods. Now, one of the things I said about that 2020 timeframe is about the start of that bubble was we were having an issue getting certain goods. Now we're going to have a different issue with the cost of those goods. In the same timeline that we were having a goods issue, not being able to get the motherboards for the computers or the appliances, blah, 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 what I was giving you earlier. The same timeline that happened, we had a ripple effect that hit the home building industry. That home building industry change led to a full real estate boom. It did. It led to a full real estate boom. I'm saying where we're at right now feels like how we start to deflate that boom, that bubble. But it also feels like how we're going to inflate the next bubble. And the next bubble I'm more focused on has to do with once Neptune goes into Aries, and that's a very different conversation, and that doesn't even happen until the end of March. You've been struggling to find a job, you've been struggling to get certain things lined out. Those struggles will not remain because certain companies are going to have no other decision but to make a change. So they're going to have to finally make certain hires. But others are going to have no other choice but to deal with whatever they've been holding off on dealing and not wanting to face. Certain realities are going to force them to take accountability. And you're going to see a mix of all of that. Some going into a fire sale category, trying to just get rid of everything that they have, so that way they can at least break even, get it off their plate. Others are going to go into the situation with the idea that they have to bring someone else on to make the company finally flow again and finally move again. But that person that they bring on is going to have a slew of changes to make the change happen, to make things go forward again. Others are going to find themselves where they've been stuck waiting for something to finally happen. It's going to happen outside of your choice. It'll be an outside situation that in the long run impacts you. Now, the example in the story that I was talking about with the home building, that's just one industry. But the other thing that I've told you guys is that through the months of November and December, I pulled more charts for businesses of every industry than I did people. Doesn't matter. Mortgage, real estate, chemical, technology, nursing, does not matter. There was a reason I was warning then. Like, I've seen more stuff changing in businesses than I have for the individual. Once the businesses finally do what they've needed to do, and certain people in positions of power and authority can finally take something forward, and that now focuses on Saturn leaving shadow and all that. The ripple effect, the response, and everything that will follow will lead to the spinning changes. For some people, there'll be fire sale changes. For other people, it'll be like whirlwind. We're going into something different, going into something new changes. And where we land on the other side, coming late April, coming into May, coming in where we land on that side, for many of us will be landing in a new normal, for even more in a new reality. Okay. This is probably long. I don't know how long I've been recording, but anyways, I love and appreciate every single one of you. I will talk to everybody very, very soon. Subscribe.